So let's talk about how you got into soccer. I mean, was that the only sport that your parents put you in? Was it something that your friends were playing that got you involved? Like, what was your introduction to the sport like?
Well, actually, my first love was baseball. And I grew up in San Francisco, and we loved going to the Giants games. And I was a really big Giants fan. And then I was talked into coming out and playing soccer one day. And it was a cold, rainy day, and believe it was November or December or something like that. And I had this epiphany. It was like the road to Damascus. I was like, this is the sport for me, and I don't ever want to do anything else. So that kind of put me on the road to where I am now. So,
I mean, at that time, was soccer like a big West Coast sport?
um, it was somewhat underground. I was in San Francisco. They'd had a semi-pro league since 1906, and they had a pretty well-developed infrastructure. Not so much for the youth, but at the semi-pro level, it was pretty robust. And so I was fortunate to gravitate into a German-based club in San Francisco, even in fact, I was 16 at the time when I moved into the semi-pro level, and that kind of pushed me along a little bit. And I got a lot of good ideas and inspiration from being able to play with older players and very good players too.
I mean, how did you get recruited to a a college in your city that you grew up in?
Well, I mean, if you're a good enough player, everybody knows who you are, and we were very fortunate to have um, the University of San Francisco was one of the major powerhouses of NCAA Division One soccer in that period. And the coach of that team also coached in the semi-pro league that I was playing in. And so he knew who all the players were, and so it was fairly easy process. It wasn't a hard process for me. I wasn't out searching through all kinds of colleges and things like that. They came and found me, and that was it. I made my mind up, and so that's pretty much it.
I mean, when you guys won the national championship in 75,
Hmm.
how far into your college degree were you?
Oh, that would have been my junior year.
Okay. So was that before or after the San Jose earthquakes signed you?
Well, I had a chance. I had another year of eligibility, and I thought about exercising that year, and I would have won another national championship if I had done that. But I was really anxious to go pro, so I told the coach that I don't think you should count on me for next year, and I'd really like to enter into the draft. And so the Earthquakes picked me up in the third round of the draft and kind of launched me off in that direction. So that was pretty much it for me.
I mean, how do you feel about early specialization sports? I mean, I feel like I talk to a fair amount of athletes who are in sports that peak early. Soccer is not one of them, but when you're going pro at like 18, 19, 20, that's pretty early compared to other sports that have a later peak post collegiately, right?
Well, yeah, you know what they say, if you're good enough, you're old enough. And so the first professional club I created basically from scratch, and I had to build an entire roster out of that. I picked up five boys who were still 16 years old and signed them. And of course, in that period of time in American soccer in the trajectory there, it was almost like heresy to be bringing young players in that young. But they flourished, and we said you can no longer be a 16-year-old if you're going to play here. You have to play like a man, and it really accelerated their development. And so, but when you ask about specialization, that's a question that there's a lot of debate about. And I think doing two sports at an early age is very beneficial, particularly if there's a crossover. And in my particular instance, I was really good at heading the ball. And I was very good at tracking long balls and things like that. And that really came from hours and hours out on the baseball field, shagging these long fly balls and tracking and, checking the wind trajectory and everything else like that and getting under it. And that translated directly into my ability to head the ball efficiently. So there's a lot of carryover. There's a lot of guys that play. Some of the top clubs in the world take breaks in terms of their youth academy development. Who take youth academy development very, very seriously. They take breaks in the year to add in things like rugby or touch rugby or basketball or other games that might have a carryover effect into developing them as soccer players.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like when I think of soccer cross training, I think of sports like track and I think of sports like rugby, that are like similar foot speed related events. I don't normally think of baseball, but I mean, as you were explaining it, it makes perfect sense.
Well, there's an enormous amount of hand-eye coordinate or eye coordination, tracking moving balls and sometimes moving very quickly. And that's also a very necessary skill in soccer. So there's definitely a carryover effect there.
So when you were going pro, was there someone that you were working with to kind of work through the kinks of that process because you were pretty young? I mean, what was that process like to transition into like professional soccer?
Well, first of all, it's a hard struggle because for certain the guys from my generation did not have a very robust youth development system to learn from. So we were a lot, in many ways, we were self-taught, or we were taught in a somewhat street sense. You're going out and you're playing with guys that are older and bigger, and they're kicking the hell out of you, and you had to learn really fast. But in a sense, the game it's all about time and space, and the more you're involved in time and space and making decisions, and trying to exercise technique within those decisions, that's how we developed. And so, do we have coach? Yeah, we had some good coaches. I had a mentor, a particular mentor that helped me out in the very early stages to develop a good technical base. He was a Chilean pro, and he was very influential in my trajectory and my development. But we didn't have the advantages that kids today have. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have 24/7 soccer. Some guys have two or three stations that show nothing but soccer. So we had I tell you, we had this program that came on in the 70s called Soccer Made in Germany. And it was a 1 hour program that highlighted Bundesliga matches. And this was like manna from heaven for people that love soccer because you had, wow, there's a soccer game on and really high level. And so we could, every soccer guy Saturday morning was talking about Soccer Made in Germany episode last night that they got to watch. And so, but we didn't have, aside from that, we didn't have that much that we could learn from and emulate. And so a lot of it had to be self-taught, or, we just had to kind of forage for ourselves and try to figure out what we could figure out.
I mean, when you're looking at soccer on the world stage compared to just domestically, what's the difference in the dialogue surrounding going pro?
Well, for starters, the demands are way higher in Europe in particular. They're way higher, and there's so much of it. The game is much faster. The technical demands are much higher. The cognitive demands are higher, and the physical demands are higher. And so, even though we have really good athletes, there's a different type of fitness that kind of fits into being able to play at a professional level in Europe. So, and we're not getting that. I was just having a conversation today, as a matter of fact, about this, and we were talking about how American players develop. There's so many little details that are skipped over in the process of developing players domestically. And one of the reasons for that, quite honestly, is that we're focused on competitive results. And the competitive results determines whether it's a successful program or it's not a successful program, not the performance, not the development of the players. And so you could have a team that's winning everything here in youth soccer in America, doing everything completely wrong. And yeah, and then they wonder what happened to these guys, why they couldn't evolve any further. They got to a certain level and then they just kind of disappear from the game. And one of the best analogies of this I heard was actually when Wayne Gretzky was talking. And of course, he's one of the greatest hockey player of all time, right? And he was playing in a tournament in Canada, and they got to the finals. of this big tournament, and they were playing against a team that nobody beats. That nobody beats. This team was just they wiped the floor with everybody. So they were a somewhat younger, somewhat smaller team playing against them, and they lost. I don't even remember what the score was, but they weren't wiped out. They were competitive in the game, but they lost. And Wayne said, you know, my dad said to me after the tournament, he said, I'll tell you what, son, not a single one of the guys on that team are going to make it to the NHL. Okay. You got much better hockey players and they have much higher level potential. Okay. Five of Wayne's teammates made it to the NHL and nobody from that other team made it. And so then, and we see this kind of reflects a lot of times how we misinterpret what success is at an early age. And again, it's a matter of, are we focused on developing players or are we developing guys that can just win at a competition at a lower age?
Yeah, I mean, I had never thought about the process of player development for a sport that is so widely regarded outside of the US.
Mhm.
Like when you're trying to build a presence for a sport that is truly beloved outside of this country, when you're trying to build a name for the sport here, where's the right place to begin?
Well, it's not a sprint; it's a marathon. And you know, I've seen I've seen an enormous I've seen an enormous development of the game in terms of its branding, of its terms of its popularity. And you know, when it was back in the NASL days when I was trying to cut my teeth as a young professional. You know, the stadiums, they were doing a pretty good job of getting people to come to the stadiums, but kids were explaining the game to their parents because parents didn't play. And even the coaches most of the coaches were on the back of volunteer parents who really knew nothing about the game. Some had some experience, but in general, our grassroots development came from people with good hearts that were interested in doing the best they could for their kids. And so we had to develop, it was a very slow train. Now those kids that were playing the game, now they're coaches, now they're players, now they're politicians, now they're sports writers, now they're marketing directors, now they're school teachers. And we have an entire base of adults, decision makers in our communities that grew up playing the game. And so I want to correct that because a lot of people say, well, are we becoming a soccer nation? No, we're not becoming. We are a soccer nation. And we talked about the game becoming a fifth major sport in the country if we consider football, baseball, basketball, and maybe ice hockey ahead of it. We're ahead of that now. We're way ahead of the curve. And now we're putting more people in soccer stadiums than we are in baseball stadiums in many respects, and many times, or hockey arenas and things like that. So the game, by the sheer weight of it, has become an enormous presence in American sports society. So we're definitely on the move. We're making some headway in the world.
I mean, I saw that you were one of the first Americans to play for Wrexham. What
Mhm.
what did that transition into like the European soccer environment mean for you personally?
Well, again, I went into an environment where, you know, I walked into I had played previously for another team that was in what was the Welsh Premier League at the time. And I came back and I had visa issues, so I had to leave. And then I came back in, and the team that I had previously been playing for, which was a pretty good team at a pretty high level, was not performing well. It was disorganized. It was a new coach, and I thought, oh, the environment is bad. So I went down the road to Wrexham, and I just walked into the coach's office, and I said, listen, I'm over here from the United States. I said, would you give me a trial and you know just give me one day, and if you don't like me, I'll leave. And no arguments, just let me go. Just let me have a look. And so they brought me in. I said, oh God, are these guys good? And they were playing, the speed of play was frightening, but I did okay. And so they said, come back the next day and you get that, we'll give you another look. And so I came back the next day and they said, okay, come back again another day. And then they about probably that repeated itself about 7 or 8 times. And then they said, okay, let's get you signed so you can start playing with us. So, but that was a really good experience because there was really good players, and I realized that if you look at Wrexham was in the third division at the time and scoring more goals than any team in all of England. So the level was really high. But what made me realize was that there are so many good players in Europe that you could go all the way down 4 or 5 divisions from the top, and you think, oh, this is amateur public. These guys are pros. They're really good, and that's what we don't quite understand in the country where you're in an advanced football nation, football country. There's players everywhere, and only so many can make it to the top. And so you look at some of these players that are second, third, or fourth, or even fifth level, they could really play. And so that was one of the real educations for me, was just how high the standards are and how dedicated and how I don't want to say how good, yeah, in a sense, how good you have to be in order to be able to break in, particularly as a foreigner.
Yeah, I mean, how old were you at that time?
19.
I mean, that's crazy.
Well, I was adventurous. I was I was a soccer pirate. Let's put it that way. I was light on my feet, and the opportunity opened, off I go. Let's take a shot at it. So there's nothing to lose without. I had an attitude. What have you got to lose by trying? At the very least, you come away smarter and more experienced, and you're a lot better understanding of what the world was like. And I can really say I got really lucky. My timing was impeccable, and it was nothing to do with me. It was just happened to the luck of the draw, I suppose. Hmm.
I mean, I feel like the underpinnings of a lot of my interviews end up being like the inner dialogue about betting on yourself
Hmm.
and knowing that success is going to come from within you. It's not going to come from what a coach says or what someone else on your team says about you. It's going to come from your personal internal drive. When you're 19 and trying to make a name for yourself internationally, you have to have that, right?
Well, just for starters, I wasn't trying to make a name for myself. I just wanted to play, and I wasn't thinking about anything else but just getting to play. And I think that one of the big mistakes that people make is thinking in terms of what that outcome, what's the desired outcome. They miss out on the process. The process is that it's not the outcome. You're not shooting for the outcome. You're shooting for the day-to-day process of getting better and learning and just having the joy of being able to play at the highest possible level. And then you throw the outcomes out the window and let the outcomes take care of itself. And that's what we try to teach our players here in Germany, is that they all have dreams, and they all say, look, I want to play at the high level. I want to be a pro and everything else like that. And I said, okay, that's a wish list. Okay, I'm not interested in your wish list. What I'm interested in is what you're willing to do with 86,400 seconds in a day. What are you willing to give up, and what are you willing to dedicate yourself to? Because it's a grind. It's a grinding process, and it's never easy. And no player has talent enough to have a smooth transition all the way up the ladder. It's all filled with heartbreaks, disappointments, questions about yourself, lack of confidence. There's just all sorts of things that happen along the way. And if you're not focused on the process and you're not fully committed to the process, then you're going to fall by the wayside.
I mean, how did that perspective for you personally change once you got into coaching?
Well, I mean, I have a myriad of experiences that I kind of bring to the table, which I think is really important. But there's a difference between developing teams and educating players. And what we focus on and what I focus on is that we want to educate players, and education is not always about X's and O's or developing tech. Yes, these things are extremely important, developing the necessary fitness levels and things like that. But our philosophy here and what has evolved for me has everything to do with what you become in the process of developing your talent. And the life skills are really critical in that, because you talk about developing perseverance, developing communication skills, developing cultural agility, developing problem solving ability to deal with difficult situations and fight your way through them. And without these skills, the chances of you actually arising to those levels that you're aspiring to go down dramatically. And so, and I think this is what's missing a lot in the American education. Again, because we're focused on, we got to get state go. Oh, we got to get to the tournament. We've got to get, this tournament's really, really important. We've got to win and stuff like that. These are just little snippets along the way. Yes, it's nice to win. You want guys to be competitive, but are we really educating them to be able to perform on a consistent high performance level? And that means how you deal with the person, the human being that you're coaching, not just the soccer player that you're coaching, or not just the athlete you're coaching.
When you finally got your first head coaching position, what did that mean for you in terms of teaching the next generation of soccer players to love their sport?
I'm not sure. Can you rephrase that question for me?
Yeah, I mean, like when you started coaching, what were you hoping to get out of being on that side of the game?
I just want to teach. I want to develop people. Of course, I'm competitive and I want to win. And at a youth level, of course, you want to win because if you win, you're bringing better players in because they want to play for you. They want to play for the coach that's getting successful. But I've always wanted to put an emphasis on educating better players. And again, if you make better players, then the winning takes care of itself.
Yeah,
And I think we can impart a lot because when you're in coaching, one of the things you have to realize it's not about you, it's about the players. And a lot of people kind of miss that message. There's an enormous impact that you can make on young lives when you're a coach. And you talk to a lot of people. You go to business meetings and things like that, and you look for leaders. And invariably, when you speak to a lot of leaders in the room, and you ask them, "Who's the person that really made the biggest impact on you growing up?" And almost probably 90% of the time, they're going to say it was a coach or a teacher. Either one is fine, but they're both in the same in the kind of in the same category. But most of them will say, "Yeah, it was a coach that really influenced me and it gave me perseverance and gave me confidence to become more than I was at the time." And that's really, really important.
when you're starting with a sport that doesn't really have traction in a country, how do you inform your youth coaches to do a good job so that you don't have player atrophy in youth sport?
Oh, don't have player what?
Player atrophy. So you're not losing players once they get into the sport.
Okay. Well, first of all, it has to be fun. And it's not always fun. Sometimes it is a grind, but you have the players have to know, in a sense, what they're getting out of it. If when a players, they're not stupid, and some guys are really motivated, and some guys are not. And we try to distinguish between, okay, we have two kinds of players that come into us. One are just kids that like to play soccer. It's fun. I like playing soccer. It's fun. Great. If there's a game on, maybe they'll watch it, maybe they won't. If there's a training session, a coach calls, they'll show up. But will they go out and do the extra things? Will they train? Will they get together with the guys and do the extra work? Probably not. And these are the ones, okay, they're going to be at a modest level. Maybe they're going to play college somewhere, or maybe they'll just drop out of the game entirely. Then you have the other guys that are completely dedicated, and they define themselves as a soccer player, and you can't stop them. If they're not at a team session, they're having a session on their own, or they're calling up guys and say, "Let's go kick, let's go do some weight training, let's do some extra fitness session, let's go watch a game together." Those are the kids that you can really work with because intrinsically they're motivated, they want more and they want more, and you can't push them hard enough. They want to be pushed hard. And so that's kind of the distinguishing factor in terms of how we're approaching both our selection process, but also how we're dealing with young players.
I mean, it's so interesting because talent is pretty steadfast. Like you can look at a player and go, the stats speak for themselves. But I feel like it's a hidden component when you're thinking about an already very talented player who is on top of that very intrinsically motivated, very driven to just succeed for the sake of themselves. I mean, that sounds like the perfect teammate, right?
Yeah, it can be, but first of all, I think talent is way overrated. And I don't think we're very good as a nation at evaluating talent. Again, because you're thinking about short-term results, and a lot of times there's better players who are not necessarily emerging. They're not. Let's take a team, and you say, let's take the first 5 or 6 players on that team. You can probably pick them out pretty quick. Okay, but what about this guy that's 12, 13, or 14? Now, why is he in that position? Is he technically weak? Is he not athletic enough? Is he not motivated enough? But very often is what we call whispering talent. That talent is there, but somebody needs to coax it out of them, and a certain amount of nature and biology has to take in place. So what happens when you have a player who's let's say he's really smart, he's really technical, and he's playing at, let's say he's 16 years old, he's playing with other 16 years old. The problem is biologically he's 14 and he hasn't kicked in, he hasn't gotten testosterone, his muscles haven't grown the way, he hasn't grown vertically yet. And so he's playing guys that are biologically older than him, but you see that he's doing the right things. Now, this is where experienced coaches come in because they say, this kid's got it. He's got the right things, but his body isn't ready for it yet. So you don't give up on a kid like that. You continue working with him because sometimes when they're, particularly if they're smaller, they're lesser developed, and they're playing with guys that are bigger and faster, they get really clever. And that cleverness starts to develop and seep into their game. They're starting to think quicker, and they learn how to play by avoiding confrontations that they can't win because they're not big enough and strong enough. Now, what happens 2 or 3 years down the road? Then nature kicks in. Their bodies are growing, they're getting stronger, they're getting faster, and they've got all this guile inside their brain that they're applying to a bigger engine, and they go sailing past these other guys. But if you don't understand the trajectory or the stage of growth or development, you can completely miss out on that player. And I think this is the mistake that we very often make because we're thinking about short-term results on the field. So they started doing an interesting thing in American soccer now. They call it biobanding. And the biobanding means that they get guys that are biologically younger than their age. They can put them into a different category so that they're not sitting on the bench all the time. They can develop at a reasonable level. And they're doing that in Germany also.
I love talking to people like you because you bring such a unique perspective to the process of becoming an elite athlete. I mean,
Mhm.
I so often talk to current athletes and recently former athletes, but I feel like the perspective of a coach and from a specifically a player development perspective is such a unique thought process to not only building a sport, but crafting a roster and developing these players from high school, college, semi-pro into incredible athletes. I think it's so cool. I mean, what did it mean to bring soccer to specifically Orlando when you founded the Lions? I mean, what was that process like? I mean, was soccer kind of coming to the surface? Did you have to work very hard to source that team? I mean, what was that process like?
Well, if you could imagine what sweating blood is like, you might get an idea. Because it was probably the best of environments to develop in that time, but it was also the worst because really we were dealing with media in general across the country that was openly hostile to the game. We didn't have the facilities that we were playing in high school football stadiums and things like that where the field wasn't correct and it was all beaten up from the high school football or whatever it is that they were playing on it. And it was a really, really hard struggle. It was difficult to find money there were times when we thought, oh my God, how are we going to get to our away game this weekend? It was hard. It was really, really hard. And I was fortunate to be around people that really believed in the mission, um, and were able to offer a helping hand at times when we didn't think it was possible to survive. And I think this gets down to I don't know, I don't like to use words like the purity of the mission, but we had a real mission that we were trying to fulfill. It wasn't about creating a business. It wasn't about creating fame and glory or creating a brand or anything else. We just wanted to get the game to people and motivate the kids that were out there playing, because there's nothing more motivating than having something to aspire to. And a lot of Americans did not have anything to aspire to, because we had a league for a while, then it went south and or went down, and we didn't have access to weekly television games or internet or anything else like that. And so they played it as one of the sports that they might be involved with. So yeah, we had a lot of problems. There was political pushback. There was pushback just from the general sports community that weren't particularly anxious for us to get any kind of facilities that we could reasonably use. And selling enough tickets and getting people to the games to pay the bills was also a hard struggle. And sometimes we wait, we have a 7 o'clock kickoff, and oh my God, no, God, it's going to rain, lightning's going to come. Dear God, it's going to wipe this whole thing out. And we deal with this stuff all the time. And you know what taught us that, though, we got very light on our feet, and we got really good at problem solving, because there's just things that we could not control. And so you had to make the best out of sometimes a really, really bad situation. So it was quite an adventure, but it wasn't just me, it was all over the country, because the failure rate of professional franchises through that period was 100%. It wasn't 90%, it wasn't 80%, it was 100%. So regardless of how much backing you had, how much branding you had, and there were some clubs that had millions and millions of dollars of backing, everybody went down at some point. And it was like a process of American soccer went through a process of death, rebirth, death, rebirth, death, and rebirth, until it got to the point where uh, we started to see that there was light at the end of the tunnel. But soccer evolved only because you had a few billionaires in the country that said, "We're going to stick through this thing no matter what, and no matter how much money we lose, we're going to stick with the process until this thing goes." Well, at one point, MLS was 400 million in debt. And the only reason it survived was because you had Philip Anschutz, who had three teams. You had Lamar Hunt with two. Then you had the guy in New England. These were all guys that said, we are committed to making sure this league survives. And that created a trickle down effect to the secondary leagues and the college programs and the youth programs and everything else. So, but it's not an overnight thing. It's a thing that took place over decades. And a lot of really smart people bit the dust in the process. But anyway, that's just part of it.
I mean, when you were looking at bringing a training center that ended up housing the US women's national team, I mean, was that a proven concept at the time, or were you just kind of betting on the sport to continue its upward trajectory?
Well, first of all, I was betting on the sport, but I have to confess, I can't take any credit for the U.S. women being there. I wanted to create an international center that would attract international teams that would come in, who would in turn spend a lot of money in the community, would give us an opportunity to see teams at the very highest level, and also a place where we could have bigger and better tournaments to bring in high level international teams and stuff like that, because soccer, even in those age, was a pretty good tourism platform. So what happened was as this training center was developed, it just so happened that the U.S. Soccer Federation were looking for a home for the U.S. women, and they came in, and it had nothing to do with me. So I want to make sure you understand that I had the idea, they had the want, and the guys got together, and so that's what happened. But yes, they won. The U.S. women won 2 World Cups and an Olympic gold medal out of residency from that center. So I can say that it was impactful,
Yeah,
even if it was accidental.
we were just talking about how it just takes one person to put something in place that has such a trickle down effect. you could say that you kind of facilitated that, right?
Well, yeah, I can say that if I didn't push this thing and show up at a lot of Chamber of Commerce meetings and civic planners meetings and stuff like that, that center would not have existed. And the women would have gone somewhere else. But I was a little bit, to be honest with you, I was a little bit angry because I said, listen, I got Bayer Leverkusen, I've got these top German teams that want to come and do winter training camp. Now I can't do it because the thing has been, I wasn't angry about it, but I just said, okay, the women have got their training center, and we hope it helps them to be successful. But I think it's really important to note that, I mean, the women's game has really taken off, which is why we're getting into the fray for next season with it. But nobody knew who Joy Fawcett was, or Mia Hamm, or Michelle Akers. And these were the biggest stars but then they could walk anywhere and nobody would even know who they were. And they would play games like us in a high school stadium against a major women's soccer power like Denmark or Sweden or something like that in front of 1,500 or 2,000 people. And that's where the game was at this time. And this was an unbelievable evolution. Now they can't play in a stadium with less than 40,000 people if they're playing a big game and things like that. So, this is all about how the game was cutting its teeth in America at that time. And if there wasn't people that were really, really dedicated to that thing, may have gone nowhere. But it was a slow train coming, and I think the perseverance that a lot of really good people had shown throughout the really difficult times is manifested today out in what we see today.
The trajectory of professional soccer just over the last 20 years, I feel like has been exponential, at least in the US. I mean, do you agree? Do you see that kind of trajectory?
Yeah, I have, and a lot of it gets down to the sheer weight of the number of people that have gotten involved, the evolution of the people that got involved in kids and kind of moved into leadership positions in their own communities or whatever. And a lot of it has to do with the amount of investment that people were willing to make in the game. And of course, it was critical to have investment. And you had these, like I said, the guys that they aforementioned that were, one guy owned three MLS franchises at one point, and he was funding all three of them. And they were struggling. They didn't have the TV money, they didn't have the widespread sponsorship and stuff like that. So yes, but these things kind of aggregated the weight of the generations that have kind of come forward and matured, the investment behind it, the access to news, the popularity of soccer related television shows and soccer dedicated TV channels, the commitment of a lot of corporate America that's gotten behind the game to sponsor events and things like that. So there's been a lot of growth that's happened in the last 20 years, but I think we're just getting started.
Yeah, I mean, when you're looking at growth on an international stage, what does it mean to bring a team from overseas and give them an affiliate in the US?
That depends on what the affiliate is, because some are done for the purposes of scouting and developing potential players for their program. But I would say probably most of them are done more for branding and marketing. There was a Bayern Munich program. Of course, Bayern is a tremendous club, super well organized, and their brand is worldwide. But they had probably about 40,000 players in the United States under Bayern Munich affiliates, and but wearing the Bayern Munich shirt all the time and say, "Oh, I'm playing for Bayern Munich USA" or something. That stuff. But the technical people at Munich, at Bayern Munich, didn't even know this existed. So this wasn't like they're zeroing in on players that were coming out of the program. I was talking to their football director there at one time. I said, "Hey, your U.S. program is really running well. You got a lot of players." He says, "I don't know anything about it." So this was done something by the marketing, but everybody's coming to America because it's an emerging talent area, and some they say it's the new Africa in a sense, because Africa was always known for incredible athletes that were coming in that they could get for relatively little investment. Now they're saying America's starting to develop players that are really potentially at a really high level, but they also see America as being economically strong, which means that branding, marketing, creating marketing opportunities is worthwhile for the clubs to say, let's make a little bit of an investment in there, give them our shirts, give them our brand, and then see what they can do to make our club more popular. So you got Dortmund, you got Werder Bremen, you got Ajax, you've got Liverpool, you've got Manchester United, you got Barcelona, you got Real Madrid, you got Milan. I can go, we could talk for a half hour about all these little satellite clubs that are around the country, and I guess there's some value to that, but I don't think we're yet at the stage where a club will say, let's invest in a feeder club in the United States for the purpose of finding undiscovered talent. And that's still yet to come.
What does it mean to be the CEO of an affiliate like that?
That depends on what you're doing. I took over Ajax in the United States for a few years, and we were trying. It was interesting because if you consider Ajax as really the gold standard for young player development in the world, you go anywhere and you talk about which clubs are really at the forefront of developing international class players. Ajax, 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 Ajax. Everyone's going to say, and everybody copied them too. And then so their methods. And so what I was trying to do is I was trying to promote that methodology in the United States. Well, the problem is that 95% of the people that we were talking to didn't know who Ajax was. And so that we had an entirely different approach to how we had to educate them. And now some people knew, of course, but if you're talking about a community with 12 million players, and you get 5% of them knowing, you still have a relatively decent size market to draw from. But educating people about the Ajax methodology was one of the hard parts. And we were looking for players that they would be interested in having, and we had one. We actually had two players that they were very, very interested in, and one ended up signing in Munich, and another one ended up signing in Hamburg. For whatever reason, they just didn't take that next step with the Ajax, and so things changed, and they started looking in other directions for their talent. But no, it was fun. I learned a lot. I spent a lot of time in Ajax, in their academy, and that they call De Toekomst, which is the Dutch word for the future. And I learned a lot about their methodology, their systems, how they develop young players, and I was able to take that experience and apply it to my other projects. So
Yeah.
that was the value of being the CEO of a affiliate.
Speaking of other projects, can you talk about the consulting that you did with Team Morocco and Team Cameroon?
Yes, I can. Morocco was in 19. It was prior to the World Cup in 1994, and the Moroccan technical team had come to Orlando because they were assigned to they were going to play in Orlando, and they wanted to know as much about the infrastructure, about the conditions and everything else, and in particular playing in our weather conditions. And so they invited me to a meeting, and I in turn invited our team doctor, who was world famous in sports medicine, and he was a U.S. Olympic team doctor, and we spoke to them about the challenges that we have at that time of the year with the weather, about hydration and recovery and things like that. So they invited us to Morocco to share the knowledge. So it was a short-term gig, but it was really fun to get in and help discuss things that were involved with planning to play in the World Championship. And then Cameroon was a very interesting opportunity for me also, because the country was a complete mess, and yet they had one of the best teams in the world. And so through almost by accident, an accidental conversation, they asked about coming in and trying to put some structure around the national team programs. And so I went in. They flew me in, and I met with the leaders of the federation, which were unbelievably corrupt. I can't even begin to. It's mind-boggling how they managed to stay alive that long. But anyway, it was a complete mess. They had no idea about medicine. Their coaching systems, the player development systems were were archaic, facilities were bad. There was no connection between the academic education and the football education, and the marketing was shambolic, and they just didn't have any organization. So, I put together a program with some very smart people. They're called, which an acronym was called SIFOTA. SIFOTA was System de Football Durable, which, and my French was horrible, so I'm sure I've slaughtered it for any French listeners there. But it just basically means system of sustainable football. And the whole idea was to bring in people with expertise in delivering education, sports science, sports medicine, injury prevention and care, hygiene, nutrition, marketing support, and then coaching support and everything else like that. And this guy, it started to get legs on it, but then corruption raised its ugly head, and people were making side deals everywhere, and the money wasn't being paid to people at the right time. So I said, okay, it's time for me to exit this before I really get myself into trouble. So that was the end of it. But it was an interesting experience for me because I found that the Cameroons were beautiful people. They had unbelievable athletes with a real warrior-like mentality. They were good. They were really good. And man, I went to one game when I was over there watching and just scouting some players, and it was on a dirt field that you wouldn't feel safe jogging on because there's so many holes and stuff like that. And yet they were playing at an unbelievable level. And these were guys that were anywhere from 15 to 18 years old. And I was very impressed about their commitment and everything. Nobody argued with the referees, and it was a very high level game. And the guy that organized it said, "I'll tell you something about those guys. Most of those guys have never eaten, not today. They haven't even eaten today, and they won't get to eat until their parents come home tonight. But they were so happy just to have a chance to play football. And so they didn't think about not eating. They didn't think about anything except the fact that they had a chance to play football and in front of somebody that might have an influence on them. They were taking these empty pop bottles full of dirty water, and that was what they drank afterward. We looked for Gatorade, and we like, oh my God, there's no Gatorade here. What's going on? These guys were drinking dirty water, and then they were using it to wash all the dust off themselves. And that was how players developed over there. But they were really. But again, it was really education for me about commitment and playing just for the love of the game.
Yeah, I mean that's so that's such a stark contrast because in
Well,
America it's like, okay, well we have this whole staff of of player specific support. When you're playing simply for the love of the game, any opportunity, any flat surface becomes a soccer field.
absolutely, absolutely. And this is what I think we're missing in the US. Kids are programmed around the official team practice. Official practice, 3 o'clock today, they'll show up. But what do they do at recess time in the game? In other countries, and you're seeing less of this now, by the way, they get out there and they've got a 15-minute break. The first thing they do is put their backpacks down or a couple of coats, make a couple of goals, and they play a game. And it doesn't have, it could be on concrete, it could be anywhere, it doesn't matter. Let's get a game, let's get a game. And they learn how to play. And learn how to play that way. And we don't, we're too, I think we're over organized in our own country. And I think that holds back our development as a soccer nation.
Wow. I mean, that's a really interesting take because I mean, American sports are so produced.
Yeah,
You think they're overproduced?
well, I think they are. You go back to your earlier question about specialization and things like that, where you just lock a kid into one activity from the time they can start walking. And sometimes it works out okay, but we are overproduced. And I think that sometimes, even in advanced soccer nations now, and in Germany is certainly one of them, they're saying we have to get more street football to develop the real international play, because there's plenty of time for structure and organization. But where they really learn is when they're completely free to play. They don't have anybody telling them what to do. Nobody's coaching them. They're learning how to play the game. They're making mistakes, big deal. They get back and they correct it and they go back and they play some more. And, the good players start to filter to the top. But, that is that free play. And it's not just for soccer, it's for other sports as well. And for others, where just go play a game without coaches, where you're totally free to make your own decisions and watch what happens. You see players, athletes develop at a really high level that way. It's particularly when it's done in tandem with or in cooperation with an organized structure, which takes that other level, takes them to that next level.
Yeah. What was your introduction to the talent project? I mean, and how do you see it intersecting player development?
Well, first of all, I think it has a potential to change the game in the US. I did the talent project because prior to 2009 and through my various roles, I had developed a lot of contacts in Europe with very high level clubs, and my connection to talented American kids would allow me to say, listen, I've got an opportunity for you to go to Bayer Leverkusen or Ajax or something. I'm going to bring you over and introduce them. And they would go over into that environment, and in a matter of a week, they'd be completely changed. Even if they couldn't sign, but they come back and they now all of a sudden they have so much comparative data. This is what I have at home. This is what these guys have got. No wonder they're way better. And they say, I've got it. What can I do to get to this level? I really want to. And they come back, and some parents would say, listen, or coaches would say, it completely changed them just a week. So now what would happen if you could take these guys and fully immerse them in for a full year? You really would change them. You completely transform them. Now, what the problem was that was really the genesis of the talent project is that FIFA, the international governing body, promulgated a regulation in 2009, which prohibited international transfers under the age of 18, which meant that a super talented American kid was stuck in the American system, which, you can argue if it's broken or it's not broken. That's not my job to make that determination, but it's not as good as what he could possibly have if he was playing at a really high level club, a European club. That stopped. And I had previously brought some really high level players from the U.S. national team into Europe before this rule. Bobby Wood, I introduced Landon Donovan to Bayer Leverkusen and a few others. But so I was looking for a way to be able to get American players into the system there without falling out or getting in trouble with FIFA law. And so the only way I could do that was, and once again, this goes back to problem solving back in the 80s when nobody wanted soccer to go anywhere. But anyway, that's notwithstanding. I decided that if I could get the boys into Europe on a student visa, even though they couldn't officially register with teams, I could give them all the benefits of being in Europe. And so we created a student visa program so they could come in for a full year. We could form our development systems. They could train twice a day. They could learn a foreign language. They could develop cultural agility. They can learn all the things off the field that you need in order to be successful on the field. Like, again, problem solving, communication skills, resilience, grit. And so they're not officially allowed to, no matter how good they are, they still can't transfer under the age of 18, but they're in an accelerated learning environment prior to that time, and they're being exposed. So a lot of our players get, scouts come to our match and they say, hey, how old is he? They say, he's 17. He's good enough for another year. We're going to track him for a year, invite him over. We're going to invite him to training so he can see our club, and we're going to see how he fits in. So we've had pretty good success, much more than I would have imagined when I started this thing, in terms of our players becoming exposed and getting opportunities. So it's a good program, and it really is. It offers something that the players can't get in the United States yet. When I say yet, because I think we're getting there, but we're not there yet.
Can you define cultural agility to me? Because I like that term. I have never heard it before.
Well, that basically refers to the ability to go into different cultures, different places where people think differently, the language is different. Um, People act different, people have different expectations and things like that, and assimilate into it quickly by being observant and trying to understand how that culture works. And I think it's incredibly important, and particularly in today's game because of the global sport. And if you look at any team in the Premier League, for example, there's probably 5 or 6 different languages being spoken in the dressing room, even though English, of course, is the key language. But they have to learn how to learn another language and how to assimilate into the culture that they're living. And if they don't do that, they're just battling against it. And a lot of times, players, if they can't make that jump, they could be super talented, but that's one of the reasons why a lot of players, really talented players, go abroad and they're talented enough to make it, but they don't make it. And part of that is they're just not able to assimilate into someone else's environment. So that's what cultural agility is.
Yeah, I think that's what I knew you were talking about, but it's interesting to think about how opportunities become available when you are prepared for them to be.
Well, that you said a very important thing there, Julia, prepared and understanding what they're up against and what they're doing, and preparation is key. And that comes from education. You get a player that's, wow, he's really good, and where he's going to go, he's got a trial with his club, and he goes over there. What does he find when he gets in there? He doesn't know what the language they're speaking. The food is different. The weather is different. The type of play is different. They're missing their friends. They're missing their family. They're missing their comfort zone. And all these things conspire together to derail the talent that would otherwise be shining forth and maybe offering them big opportunities, but they can't make that jump. And this has nothing to do with talent. This has everything to do with your ability to assimilate, and are you prepared for this challenge?
Yeah, I think there's the phrase "I'd rather be lucky than good," I think is so it you could unpack that in so many ways, but one of my favorite things to think about is the idea of including preparation into
Mhm.
that equation. Because if you are prepared, you are going to be better and
Mhm.
you're going to need less luck. It's not going to be luck because you'll be prepared for whatever comes.
Well, there's a saying that the harder you work, the luckier you get. But Julia, I tell you that you can't get anywhere without luck. And sometimes it's just a matter of being at the right place at the right time, or you could equally have bad luck. What if you're a really, really great player in a specific position and you say, wow, this guy's really good, but I've already got 3 guys like that. That's what's called bad luck, so, or you could go out to have a super talented player and he goes out and the very first day he gets a season-ending injury. That's bad luck too. But so a lot of times, a lot of things have to fall together for players, and it's not just about, again, I go back to the point where it's not just about talent, because talent is way overrated. You need a lot of other things to go with it. Otherwise, the talent has no chance.
Man, I loved this interview. Thank you so much for coming on. My questions are over. Is there anything else that you would like to add that you don't think that we covered in this interview?
Well, I think you covered the salient points, Julie. By the way, I love your podcast. I think you do really good and you ask really good questions. And, I really enjoy listening to your podcast. I think
Thank you
they're
so
really,
much.
really good. So I appreciate the chance to come on and talk. I enjoyed it.